Good evening, you're watching World News Tonight on TVP World. I'm Aaron Darman. The Czech Republic is gearing up tonight for a new Eurosceptic government as Prime Minister in waiting Andrej Babiš reveals a coalition deal is ready to be signed next week. More in just a moment, but first, tonight's headlines. America cuts its troop presence on NATO's eastern flank. Georgia's ruling party targets the country's political opposition. And a first Baltic offshore wind farm for Poland. But we begin tonight in the Czech Republic, where the country's election winner Andrej Babiš says his ANO party will put pen to paper on a coalition agreement with the Eurosceptic motorists and far-right SPD parties on Monday. Let's go straight to Prague, where our correspondent Andrew Sweeney is standing by. Good evening, Andrew. So what more can you tell us?
Well, there are a few protesters still outside Prague Castle making their voice heard against the inclusion of the far-right Freedom and Democracy in Babiš's new coalition. The Czech Republic has had parties of the fringe right in Parliament for quite some time, but this is the first time in independent Czech history that they will be given the keys to power. There's still a lot to go through the process of actually forming a government. Ministerial appointees are due soon. However, it is certainly an unprecedented time for Czechs and their role in the EU and in NATO.
A coalition agreement between ANO, the SPD and the motorists will be signed on November 3rd, heralding the most right-wing government in independent Czech history. Andrej Babiš, a billionaire former Prime Minister, and his ANO party won a plurality of seats during parliamentary elections in early October, in a campaign dominated by the cost of living and the war in Ukraine.
I'm glad that the president has entrusted me with forming a government today. We have to finalize the coalition agreement and program statement. And as soon as these documents are ready, we will address the personnel composition of the government.
During his previous stint as Prime Minister, Babiš governed with support from the Czech Communist Party. This time around, his options were even more limited. The outgoing governing coalition Spolu, led by the now ex-Prime Minister Petr Fiala, the centrist Mayors and Independents, and the Liberal Pirates all refused to work with Babiš and his party. Babiš's apparent beggar's choice is controversial. The SPD has long wanted to leave the EU and NATO and has consistently called for closer ties with Russia. The party's leader, Tomio Okamura, is set to preside over the Chamber of Deputies as its president. As for the motorists, their pick for the foreign minister's job, Filip Turek, is embroiled in a scandal over his racist, sexist and pro-fascist social media posts. The popularity of these far-right parties reflects a divide between the cities and regions in the Czech Republic. Economic disparity has led to a surge in support for fringe causes.
There's a huge difference between the very affluent cities, especially Prague, Brno as well, and the countryside, where actually people really are on the borderline of poverty, and many of them in poverty.
The rising cost of living in the Czech Republic has made cutting aid to Ukraine a popular policy with these voters. The incoming government is also set to reduce defence spending too. Alena Skilerova, finance minister in Babiš's previous government, said on October 28th that the coalition would only spend 2% on defence. With most of the coalition's policies now agreed on, the next stage is to appoint a government by nominating ministers to be approved by President Petr Pavel. For TVP World, Andrew Sweeney.
Vladimir Putin is relying on the war in Ukraine to stay in power. This from exiled Russian opposition leader Garry Kasparov, speaking exclusively tonight to TVP World. The remarks come on the same day that Russian forces shelled a children's hospital in Kherson, and in the same week that the United Nations alleged Kremlin soldiers have been using drones to hunt Ukrainian civilians on the front line. John Todd has more.
This is the wreckage of Kherson Children's Hospital, shelled by Russian forces on Wednesday morning as surgery rooms were filled with young patients. A 9-year-old girl sustained blast injuries and shrapnel wounds, and 8 other people were injured.
The facility was attacked by Russia. As a result of the shelling, the automated control system and ultrasound diagnostics department were damaged.
Vladimir Putin on Wednesday told injured troops that Russia had tested a Poseidon nuclear-powered super-autonomous torpedo. At the weekend, the Russian president boasted about a nuclear-fueled missile he claimed had an unlimited range. Analysts have interpreted the announcements as a sign of weakness after Donald Trump ditched plans for a second summit with Putin over his maximalist demands.
I'm going to have to know that we're going to make a deal. I'm not going to be wasting my time.
And imposed sanctions on Russian oil giants Rosneft and Lukoil. While Ukraine continues to resist the Kremlin's military campaign around Pokrovsk and elsewhere on the front line, analysts highlight another miscalculation by Moscow. The recent trip by Putin's special envoy for investment and economic cooperation, Kirill Dmitriev, to the US.
He floated these ideas about, quote, diplomatic solutions to the war in Ukraine, talked about symbolic projects like a Putin-Trump tunnel. No one's quite sure what that is. But it didn't really have any substantial impact. In fact, like I said before, I think it really backfired.
And the exiled Russian opposition activist Garry Kasparov told On the Record with TVP World's Adam Yasser that Putin's maximalist approach, winning the war, has become his only way of keeping power in the country.
Donald Trump's, in my view, very generous offer to Putin illustrated my point that even Trump's offer, which was on the table, that, you know, from our point of view, if we look at this from rational analysis, was great. Putin turned it down twice because he cannot stop the war.
As attacks on Ukraine's power supplies and key infrastructure continue, that's bad news for millions who are bracing for yet another cold, dark winter. This is John Todd for TVP World.
And you can watch the full exclusive interview with Garry Kasparov after World News Tonight. America's top official to NATO says his country is serious about enforcing sanctions on Russian oil. Matthew Whitaker insisting Donald Trump will follow through on his threats to force President Putin to the negotiating table. As Maciej Belowski reports, the economic impacts are already being felt, despite the new measures not coming into full effect for another 3 weeks.
The U.S. is serious about enforcing its new sanctions on Russian oil. Matthew Whitaker, the U.S. ambassador to NATO, confirmed the Trump administration's stance in an interview with Bloomberg.
We've implemented those sanctions. We plan to enforce them.
The statement comes a week after the U.S. sanctioned Lukoil and Rosneft, Russia's two biggest oil companies. The sanctions could severely impact Russia's oil revenues and its economy.
This is a serious blow to Russian oil sector. Those companies are basically the half of Russian oil industry.
Although the sanctions don't fully take effect until November 21st, they've already had some impact.
Lukoil already announced that it plans to sell its international assets, refineries, among others, in short notice.
However, some of both companies' foreign subsidiaries, including Rosneft's German operations, were exempted from sanctions. The German government had earlier appealed to the U.S. to circumvent sanctions on the grounds that Rosneft's German refineries were no longer Russian-controlled and are vital for the country's energy supply. The German government had placed the refineries under state trusteeship in 2022 after Russia invaded Ukraine. Sanctions on Russian oil have faced criticism from a common source, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban. Orban is expected to meet with U.S. President Donald Trump in Washington next week, where the topic of sanctions will likely be at the forefront.
It's basically talking about U.S. sanctions because Hungary and Slovakia, as we know, they have exemptions from the EU and they import Russian crude oil via Druzhba pipelines.
If the Trump administration stays the course on enforcing these sanctions, it could deal the Russian economy and war machine a major blow. Maciej Belowski for TVP World.
Staying with the United States now, and Washington is slashing the number of troops on NATO's eastern flank, resizing the country's deployment in Romania to just under 1,000 soldiers. But despite Bucharest insisting the move is not surprising, some say it's hardly good news, with Warsaw now working overtime to ensure the same does not happen on Polish soil. Paweł Trzaskowski explains.
Fewer US soldiers in the eastern flank, as Washington is withdrawing some of its troops from Romania. Bucharest reassures the decision was not a surprise for the country that's been a NATO member since 2004.
This reassessment of troop posture is part of a broader strategy announced at the beginning of the year by the United States.
The troops are being withdrawn and sent back to Kentucky as the US shifts its focus further to the east. Out of 1,700 personnel, about 900 will remain stationed in Romania. This is because Washington plans to
pay more attention to their own defences. The United States will look more towards the Indo-Pacific.
This withdrawal is an element of Washington's diminishing military footprint in Europe, announced when the Trump administration took over. This tactic was best illustrated by Pete Hegseth's leaked chat message about pathetic European freeloading. And although their rhetoric might be more diplomatic now, the US stays the course. For example, the proposed 2026 budget does not include funding for the Baltic Security Initiative, a program bolstering the defense capabilities of the Baltic states. Poland, which currently hosts about 10,000 US troops, has not been directly affected for now, and Warsaw intends to fight hard to keep American troops in.
We will do everything we can to ensure there are as many American troops in Poland as possible.
With the US partly withdrawing, Washington wants to pressure European NATO members to fend for themselves and contribute more to helping Ukraine. The change is already gaining momentum, with even the ever-reluctant Spain recently forced into buying US weapons that will be sent to Kiev. But the withdrawal, even partial, is hardly good news.
Clearly, this is a time of great tension in Europe. Don't need to tell your viewers about that. Putin's invasion of Ukraine, an increasingly confrontational tone vis-à-vis NATO being taken by Russia.
Seen in this light, frontline countries would welcome a strengthened US presence in the region, not a weakened one. Paweł Trzaskowski, TVP World.
Moving to Poland, where political drama is unfolding over the main opposition Law and Justice Party and its previous term in office. A former agriculture minister is facing allegations he sold a state-owned piece of land crucial for a future airport hub. On top of that, an ex-minister of justice faces charges of leading an organised crime ring and misusing millions of euros of public money. Kazimierz Wyszek reports.
It's been a tough week for the Polish right-wing opposition party Law and Justice. First, there is the case of this lot. It may seem insignificant at first, but it's through here that a major railway line was supposed to be constructed. A line leading to the future central transport hub, a massive airport in the middle of Poland. But the lot was sold to a private corporation, Daftona. This happened in the last 2 weeks of the Law and Justice's term at the end of 2023. And the sale was for pennies on the dollar.
What baffles us is also the time it took to sell this lot. Many documents and decisions took not weeks, not days, but hours and sometimes minutes.
The airport was a flagship project of the former government and has been continued by the current centrist coalition. And that crucial piece of land was under the special protection of the law.
For sure, we can see that the law was broken, especially when it comes to this special act that was act of parliament that was supposed to protect this investment.
The former Minister of Agriculture and his deputy have been suspended from the party by the Law and Justice leadership. But that's not the end of trouble for the Conservatives. Former Minister of Justice Zbigniew Ziobro is facing charges for leading an organized crime group responsible for misusing some 35 million euros from a public fund for victims of crimes.
The prosecution wants to charge him with committing crimes for financial gain of others, as well as for personal and political purposes.
The leader of Law and Justice claims these charges are an example of the government's political witch hunt.
This is a completely scandalous decision, a decision which we can only view as politically motivated. This government can't handle anything.
One legal expert says Poland has never seen more serious charges laid against a former Minister of Justice.
This is definitely unprecedented, not only in Polish politics, but also in European politics. I do not recall any case with a Minister of Justice that would face such a serious criminal charges.
The former minister could face up to 30 years in prison for all the charges laid against him. These scandals are now surfacing as political parties in Poland are getting ready for the pre-election season. Poland will hold parliamentary elections in 2027. For TVP World, I'm Kazimierz Łysiak.
Georgia's government is moving to ban 3 pro-Western opposition parties, claiming they pose a, quote, real threat to the constitutional order. But experts warn Tbilisi is closely following the Kremlin playbook, cracking down on protesters, journalists and politicians. Gabriela Jelonek has more.
The ruling Georgian Dream Party has filed a constitutional court appeal seeking to ban 3 major opposition forces. The lawsuit aims to outlaw the Coalition for Change party, ex-president Mikhail Saakashvili's United National Movement, and the strong Georgia bloc, which surpassed the 5% threshold in the disputed 2024 parliamentary elections. Shalva Papuashvili, a senior member of the Georgian Dream, said these 3 groups, which are all strongly pro-Western, pose a real threat to the constitutional order.
When the democracy is not properly functioning, it means that civic spaces and freedom of individuals are shrinked, and Georgia is a good example for this.
The ruling party also warned that smaller opposition groups could face similar action, but assured that would not be the case for the former Prime Minister Giorgi Gaharias for Georgia party, whose MPs took their seats in the disputed parliament after a year-long boycott. Although Georgia is an EU candidate country, authoritarian tendencies are on the rise.
These patterns usually are first used in Russia, then it's repeated in other countries. We are calling several pieces of legislation, so-called the Russian laws in Georgia, because they 100% resemble Russian legislation.
Since the start of the full-scale war in Ukraine, Georgia has deepened its economic ties with neighboring Russia. Several senior Georgian opposition figures are in jail, while police have ramped up arrests of protesters attending regular anti-government demonstrations, including journalists. Among them is Mzia Amachlobeli, who received the Sakharov Prize from the European Parliament this year.
Journalists currently in prison on trumped-up charges simply for doing their work and for speaking out against injustice.
The Georgian Dream has frozen talks on Georgia's accession to the European Union and has accused the bloc of plotting a revolution in Tbilisi. The EU denies the accusations. For TVP World, Gabriela Jelonek.
It's less than an hour until polls close in the Netherlands as the Dutch head to the ballot box for the 3rd time in 4 years. Leading the race is the far-right Geert Wilders, who walked out on his coalition partners in June, triggering the snap election. But as Alex Cadier reports, Wilders will still need the support of others if he comes out on top, with no single party ever having won an outright majority to govern alone.
The Dutch are heading to the polls for the 3rd time in 4 years. The country's electoral system means that no matter which direction the voters decide, a lengthy cycle of coalition negotiations is likely to follow. Leading the polls as he was last time is far-right leader Geert Wilders. His one-man party has called for a freeze to asylum claims, calling refugees fortune hunters who come to the Netherlands mainly for our houses, our benefits and our women. But even if he wins, he won't be Prime Minister. Why? Because Dutch politics is all about coalition building. A single party has never won an outright majority to govern alone. Wilders won the last election in 2023, doing much better than the polls predicted. He was even able to form a government in coalition with other parties, on the condition that he did not serve as prime minister. But after just 11 months, he was out. After falling out with his coalition partners over immigration, Wilders walked out on his coalition and collapsed the government, something that could cost him with voters this time around.
We have to see, of course, whether they swing away from Wilders, but reasons to stay away from that political party is because it's hardly acceptable as a coalition party in the next few years. It failed in the previous coalition, so quite some people would think we vote for a right-wing alternative that will maybe be part of the next coalition.
So if not Wilders, then who? This time, other parties have ruled out working with him. That leaves former EU Commissioner and Labour Green leader Frans Timmermans on the left, or centrist Rob Jetten as potential coalition leaders and prime ministers. But that doesn't mean a new government will be able to take off quite yet. In previous parliaments, it took up to 299 days for a government to be formed. Whatever happens at the polls, it may be months until a Dutch government is formed, and months before the country's pressing issues can finally be addressed. Alex Cadier, TVP World.
The Baltic Sea is emerging as one of Europe's largest offshore wind hubs, and now Poland is getting in on the act. TVP World was granted exclusive access to Baltic Power, a joint venture between energy giant Orlen and a Canadian power producer. Aisha Abaji has more.
Behind me stretches the Baltic Sea, and soon its winds will be transformed into electricity that will power more than 1 million Polish homes. Poland's first offshore wind farm, Baltic Power, is now under construction. TVP World was granted exclusive access to see how this landmark project is taking shape at sea.
The turbine is so capable that it can work from the lowest wind speeds as low as 3 meters per second. So basically we are able to generate renewable energy almost no matter the wind conditions.
The Baltic Sea is emerging as one of Europe's biggest offshore wind hubs, and the Baltic Power wind farm, a joint venture between Polish energy giant Orlen and Canada's Northland Power, will be the first large-scale offshore wind project in Polish waters. Located 23 kilometers off the coast between Łeba and Choczewo, it will feature 76 turbines.
One turbine, and each turbine will have 15 megawatts of electric power. This is enough to power a medium-sized city. They are the biggest European offshore wind turbines which are commercially offered at the moment.
Together, they are expected to cover around 3% of Poland's total electricity demand, according to Orlen. We've also had the rare opportunity to see the two offshore substations of the wind farm, each weighing 2,500 tons, as their installation was completed. These massive structures will be collecting the electricity from all the turbines once they're operational and delivering it to the mainland.
We managed to achieve quite significant amount of local content in Baltic Power. Excellent example of that is actually our substation, which full steel structure has been built in the shipyard in Gdańsk and Gdynia.
Poland's state-owned energy group Orlen has announced an investment of 827 million euros to develop offshore wind projects in the Baltic Sea. The country still relies heavily on coal and oil, but projects like this, along with the upcoming nuclear power plants, one in nearby Choczewo, mark a strategic shift towards a cleaner, more secure energy mix and greater independence from imported fuels.
We are moving from the coal mines into renewables, so we have a wind out there and we are just harvesting the energy from the wind, which is renewable.
23 kilometers offshore, turbines the size of skyscrapers are rising from the Baltic, a powerful symbol of how Poland is redefining its energy future. For TVP World, I'm Aisha Badja.
We return now to our top story, what the formation of a new government in the Czech Republic could mean for Europe, NATO and Ukraine. Joining me for more is Roland Freudenstein, co-founder at the Brussels Freedom Hub. Good evening, Roland.
Good evening, Aaron. Thanks for having me.
So let's talk about Prague. We have a coalition made up of a far-right anti-EU and NATO party. We've got the Eurosceptic motorists and we've got the populist ANO party. Break it down for me. I mean, what will this mean in practice for the country? And potentially, what will it mean for the Czech Republic's position on the likes of NATO, Ukraine?
Well, it's not good news. So we are having nationalists, some with open fascist leanings in government. And we have, indeed, as you said, anti-EU, anti-NATO people in responsible positions. And we will also see some degree of convergence between Czechia, Slovakia, and Hungary. So that will become a kind of a Ukraine skeptic, potentially pro-Russian triangle in the European Union and NATO. And that's not good news.
So do you think that we will see a real gear change when it comes to the Czechs' position?
Well, that's an open question still. We've got these declarations made before the election by Babiš and by his coalition partners, but we also have the president of the Czech Republic, Petr Pavel, who is definitely on the other side. Now, he has to work with that government in some way, but I think he can prevent the worst from happening, and he can at least send some signals that not the whole of Czechia is changing in the direction that Mr. Babiš would like it to change. And last but not least, I don't think we're going to see a Hungary-style authoritarian change in the country. Checks and balances in the Czech Republic still work. So all this is good news within the big bad news that we now have a NATO skeptic and potentially pro-Russian government in Prague.
Well, that was going to be my next question. I mean, when we talk about Andrej Babiš, is it as simple as saying that the Czech Republic now has another Viktor Orbán or Robert Fico running the show, or is he simply a more pragmatic operator?
Well, definitely the latter. Also, Robert Fico is more pragmatic than Viktor Orbán. So we will have the two northern neighbors of Hungary not becoming authoritarian countries like Hungary has become. But I mean, even for Hungary, there's hope next year. But so it's a mixed picture, and I think we will see a lot of pragmatism from those governments, because in fact, neither Robert Fico nor Andrej Babiš will want to leave the EU, will want to go into an open battle with Brussels the way that Viktor Orbán does.
I am curious because Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, he wants the likes of Fico and Babiš to form a kind of blocking minority within the EU with him. Babiš has since poured some cold water on the idea, but do you see that kind of a minority existing and then stifling Brussels even further, especially when it comes to Ukraine?
Blocking minority for those three countries wouldn't work. I mean, the votes are just not there. A blocking minority has to be a sizable part of the European Council, and this is dependent on the relative size of countries and the number of their citizens. So these three countries cannot form a blocking minority. But it's, any ally is welcome for Viktor Orbán in trying to slow down EU help for Ukraine. And we see this in the latest hot question with the frozen assets, Russian frozen assets, and the way the EU wants to use it, or the majority of the countries of the EU want to use it to actually assist Ukraine in filling the budget deficit and paying for the reconstruction of Ukraine. So Orban intends to block this. The other member states will find a way around it. But, if Orban is not alone, that is still better for him, and he can maybe slow it down a little bit longer. But all this is why the EU is now really aiming to have a decisive a decision on the frozen assets before the new Czech government actually takes office in December.
Well, we're running out of time, but briefly on the frozen assets and on Brussels being stifled. I mean, again this week, we've seen an inability to make a decision when it comes to those frozen assets. Is Europe going round and round in circles, and what will it take to release them?
The other member states need to give the Belgian government better guarantees that they won't be left standing in the rain, so to speak, if there is a court case. And the European Commission has to better prepare the next summit. The next summit is going to happen. It's about 19th and 20th of December. And I think we can pretty safely assume that until then, the majority of the EU member states have found a solution, and the whole operation using the frozen assets to help Ukraine is going ahead.
Roland Freudenstein, co-founder at the Brussels Freedom Hub. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
And that's all for World News tonight. Do stay with us here on TVP World. I'm Aaron Darman. Good night.